Okay, well, thank you for choosing to watch this short video about pain and stress. Most of the patients I meet at Manchester Pain Centre tell me that they already know how important stress is for managing pain because they know from first-hand experience how stress can really increase their pain and suffering. So over the next 10 minutes, we're going to look at why that always happens and most importantly, what we can do about it. First, I'd like to ask though, what do we mean by stress? And patients tend to tell me, first of all, about the symptoms in their body. So they notice that their muscles might get really tense, particularly your neck and shoulders. Might notice your heart racing and pumping harder. Might notice symptoms in the stomach, such as your stomach churning or feeling sick or even being sick, I'm afraid. I'm going to be polite and just say toilet symptoms and just leave it at that. But also getting hot and sweaty. Those are those classic symptoms of kind of our stress system really being in full flow. It also affects our emotions as well. So people often feel really frustrated or angry, or they might feel really scared or kind of terrified of what's about to happen. And unfortunately, the longer that stress goes on, the more people start to feel kind of really exhausted by that and actually start to feel really hopeless and burnt out and feel as though they want to give up. And that brings us to urges really and behaviours. When people are under a lot of stress, they might do short-term things as a quick fix. So they might reach for the biscuit tin for a sugary fix, or might drink too much alcohol, or engage in risky behaviours that it might not normally do, but it's all to try and feel a little bit more in control of the situation. So now that we know the symptoms of the stress response, I want us to think about why we have it. How does it help us? Well, we know that our ancestors, millions of years ago, lived in really dangerous times and they needed a central nervous system that allowed them to be able to respond quickly to any danger coming towards them. I guess they might have been stepping out of the cave in caveman days and there could have been a saber-toothed tiger there. So they needed to be able to either run away from that danger or, I guess, if they were brave enough, to be able to stand their ground and fight to the death. So we too have inherited this central nervous system that responds very quickly to danger, and that is what our stress system is all about. It helps us respond to danger. We also have a central nervous system that is hardwired to respond to stress and danger as well. And let's think a little bit more about how the human brain has evolved over those millions of years. Nature never starts from scratch. It always adds an extension to what went before. So our brains have evolved, and I like to think of human brains as being in 4 very distinct stages really. The brainstem is the simplest bit of our brain. I like to think of it as my slug brain. There's no thinking or feeling going on there, but it does control very life-preserving functions like breathing and your heart rate. That sits at the top of your spinal cord, your brainstem, and all of the information going up our body hits the brainstem first and it starts to react, so our heart rate might speed up before we're even aware of what the danger is in the environment. You do hear of really sad cases where people are brainstem dead and actually their heart might still be beating and they're still breathing, but sadly there aren't any higher functions still working. So that brainstem can preserve those life functions without the higher functions. If we think about the next level of the human brain, the limbic system, that's a part of our brain that we have in common with crocodiles and dinosaurs. I like to think of it as my dinosaur brain, to be honest. And that is the part of our brain where our strong emotions come from, things like rage or intense fear or lust. So our limbic system receives information coming up our spinal cord after our brainstem. So our heart might start to beat faster in our brainstem, and then we might start to have an emotional reaction to that information because our dinosaur brain has already received that information and started to react. And it's only after that that the information gets to the 3rd level of our brains, the pink crenulated cortex that sits on the surface of our brain. That's what I like to think of as my civilized mind. That's where all of our memories are stored, all the things we've learned and our skills over the years, and that bit gets the information next. And the most important part of our brain, the most recently developed, is actually our frontal lobes, these bits here, the neocortex. We have that in common with apes and other monkeys and primates. Our neocortex at the front of our brain controls the rest of our brain functions. It's a bit like a conductor standing at the front of an orchestra. Doesn't actually play an instrument itself, but gets all the other musicians playing in harmony together. We can actually live without our frontal lobes. There are cases where people have had severe frontal lobe damage and they're still alive, but unfortunately their personality completely changes. They're no longer able to control their impulsive urges and behaviours. So they start gambling, they often lose their jobs, and they become sexually promiscuous. It completely changes their behaviour, their personalities, if they're no longer able to control those basic urges that are developed by the earlier parts of our brain. Interestingly, you can practice exercises to further develop your frontal lobes. We know that monks, for example, who've been meditating for years, if we put them in brain scanners, we know that their frontal lobe circuits are much better developed and much more able to control those urges and impulses of the more primitive areas of our brain. So what does all of this mean? Let's go back to thinking about those symptoms of stress that we talked about earlier. Why do we have those symptoms of stress? Well, they all evolved to save our ancestors' lives when they were living in really dangerous times. Tensing your muscles and shoulders allows you to then spring out and run away from dangerous situations. That increased heart rate and faster breathing allows you to get more blood around your body so that it gets to your muscles again to help you to run faster or to stand your ground and fight to the death if you're brave enough. Unfortunately, in modern life, most of the kind of threats and dangers that cause us stress are inside of us, and certainly with pain's inside of us, but it's like a burglar alarm going off in our heads. It activates all of our danger signals in both our brainstem, our limbic system, our cortex, and also our frontal lobes. That burglar alarm is really hard to ignore because it activates our stress system. So our muscles will tense in response to our pain, our heart will start beating faster, we'll get those awful tummy symptoms and toilet symptoms. The good news is that nature has given us the answer to all this. Even though every organ in our body has a set of nerves that can crank and wind and speed things up as part of our stress system, we also have an equal and opposite set of nerves that calms and soothes and slows things down. We actually call this our rest and digest system, and it comes online when there's an absence of danger. The good news is there are some simple techniques that we can learn that actually stimulates our soothing and rest and digest system so that we can practice exercises to directly counter all of that natural stress response. So we can't stop stress happening, I'm afraid. Human beings are hardwired to respond to danger. So we're hardwired to run away or to want to fight it. But once we notice that stress reaction happening in our bodies, because we have these well-developed frontal lobes, we can choose to practice exercises that can calm and soothe those effects on our bodies. That is why your nurse or your doctor thought you might benefit from coming to meet with the self-management team. We want to show you how to practice those self-management techniques that can calm and soothe that natural reaction to your pain. That's going to help you to feel more in control of your pain and getting back in control of your life again.